Welcome back. Our conversations continue here at Davos 2024. As I've been telling you, the two key questions that the World Economic Forum is asking business leaders who are attending the summit this year is whether 2024 is likely to be a year of a perma-crisis, or we are likely to see a resolution, resilience and recovery. Well, let me put those questions to Ken Rogoff, who joins us as always here on Davos 2024. Mr. Rogoff, many thanks. A Happy New Year. Thanks very much for joining us here in Davos again. So the answer to those questions?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is 2023 was better than I think most of us imagined. I wasn't one of those saying there'll absolutely be a recession, but it's surprising to have interest rates go up that much and not have that happen. So all you can say about 2024 is it probably is not going to be as good as 2023. And the volatilities around geopolitical events, the still high interest rates, inflation hasn't come down, is still pretty considerable. But I have to be sobered by, look at 2023, which could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, and it didn't turn out to be as bad as people were expecting to be. We didn't have the recession in the US, even though, as you point out, we had record high interest rates. But on interest rates, you believe that even with inflation coming down, we're likely to see rates continue to be higher for longer?
Well, I do believe that. I've been writing about this really for a decade, that they fell off a cliff after the financial crisis. And people would come up with these after-the-fact rationales. Oh, you know, demographics, people are getting older. We're never inventing anything again. This is going to be forever. It's summarized in my brilliant colleague Larry Summers' Secular Stagnation. I never bought it. And my own academic work on this shows that we get these interest rate cycles, but they tend to go away after a time. So I think we're going to be looking at interest rates that are more normal, but not necessarily what people have gotten used to. So put a different way, inflation's coming down. Interest rates will come down, but not as much.
So where do you see the rate trajectory over the next few years?
Well, I mean, I think looking at the long end, you know, the 10-year rate, I think it's probably going to be in the 4 to 4.5 range for the United States, and inflation adjusted, maybe, you know, 1.5 to 2 in there, you know, at sort of the range it's in now. So I think a lot of the market's adjusted to a lot of this already. I will also say that studying the history, it's very volatile. So that's what I think it's going to be on average over the next decade. But you know, we have a recession, interest rates are going to go down, but the recession's not going to last forever.
What are the odds on a recession now, the sort of late impact of the hike in interest rates, etc.? Or do you believe that the US resilience that we saw to 2023 is likely to continue?
Well, I mean, the odds of a recession in a normal year are 1 in 7. I think they're higher now, so in the 25 to 30% range for the United States, and maybe for Europe higher than that because they have a whole host of other problems. You know, but it could be worse.
Emerging markets, and you wrote a piece about the stunning resilience that we saw as far as emerging markets are concerned in 2023. Do you expect that to continue? Because we didn't see the debt distress that we were fearing.
We didn't see it in the big emerging markets. So there's certainly more defaults in the lower and middle income emerging markets than we've had in a very long time. And developing economies, a huge percentage of them are in default. But yes, it's been surprising. Normally when you see interest rates go up this much, this fast, there are accidents. We didn't even have a crisis in Turkey, which was really hard to understand given that, you know, they fired the central banker, you know, every 3 months and had 60, 100% inflation.
So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, you know, some of it is that the emerging markets have taken to heart some of the so-called Washington consensus, which, you know, politically they don't, but more conservative fiscal policy, more conservative monetary policy, and probably their own element, which is a lot of reserves. I mean, I think that's really provided some resilience. But, you know, it's been lucky. I mean, I'm not sure we're going to go through another year without seeing a major emerging market or two have a big problem.
Well, we will have to wait to see what pans out on that front. But let's talk about India and the outlook for India. I mean, here the mood continues to be fairly bullish as far as India is concerned. What's your take?
Well, I mean, I think part of the reason the mood's bullish on India is it's so negative on China. I agree with that. I mean, I think when we spoke last year, I talked about that. And so India is sort of looking good by comparison, and the rate of growth is very good. But I mean, India still has a long ways to catch up, and it's doing, I think, some things really well. Like it's finally gotten it together on building infrastructure and catching up on that, which is low-hanging fruit in development. I mean, there's no reason for India not to have world-class infrastructure in order to be able to build out its economy. On the other hand, you still have, some of the issues with way too much protectionism. At least according to people who study it, a lot of monopolies really in India, over-concentration of power. But, clearly India is very well represented at Davos here. The mood's bullish. I would be cautiously optimistic because there are some of these longer-term problems that if you're really going to catch up, you need to take care of.
You talked about China, and we are seeing the Chinese economy slowing down considerably, and the hope of, or the anticipation of the recovery hasn't panned out the way that one was expecting. What's the take, what's the prognosis on China from here on?
Well, I wasn't expecting a recovery, as I think I told you last year. I think China has these long-term problems where it's making the transition from this very fast-growing economy to one that's growing a lot more slowly over the next decade. So part of it is India's building a lot of infrastructure now. It's going to get very high returns. I mean, not all of it. I don't want to get into what problems are, but I think it's works. China's been doing that for a long time. It's running into what we economists call diminishing returns. You stop getting a lot for what you do. You can go to housing, you can go to office real estate, so that's slowing down. And then the centralization of power that's occurred under President Xi. I mean, maybe I'm too trained as a Western economist, but I think it's well past the point of being productive. They don't decentralize decisions. They have an aging workforce. India is much stronger on that. So China may have some cyclical recovery of some sort, but I think the next decade, 2 decades, are going to be looking 2 or 3% growth if they're lucky. And the whole notion that China is going to surpass the United States, that Goldman Sachs and the World Bank and others had pushed, I think you can kiss that goodbye. That's really unlikely now.
So a 2 to 3% growth rate for China over the next decade or 2 decades, as you imagine it to be, the implications of that for the global economy?
Well, first of all, 2 to 3% when your population's not growing, not so bad. It still looks pretty good compared to a lot of the rest of the world. But for one thing, China's been a buffer. When the United States has a recession, China grows and it's okay. So I don't think we're feeling it right now as we might, because the U.S. is growing faster than, frankly, I think it's going to grow next year in 2024. So that China's slowdown hasn't mattered as much. So we're certainly losing that counterbalance to the U.S. And of course, China has been an engine of growth for the whole world. And there are other countries that will gradually replace some of the investment that was going to China is going to Vietnam, it's going to Malaysia, it's going to India. But I think it's going to take time to replace China as an engine of growth.
Let's talk about the U.S. And you said that you expect growth to slow in comparison to 2023 in this year. You've also got the elections, and I know a lot of business leaders that we've been speaking to here are watching that event very closely and the potential for that to see any significant policy shifts. How are you reading what could happen from the polls and the impact on the economy?
Well, I mean, it's just all over the map. I mean, part of the issue in the United States is we have not just a lot of divisiveness, but it's 50-50. It could go this way, it could go that way, to these extremes that it could swing. If the Trump wins, there are many people who think that's an existential threat to the world, and I'm not denying it's pretty erratic and unpredictable. On the other hand, if the Democrats win big, I think we're going to see fiscal deficits, the likes of which you can't imagine, and eventually leading to inflation and problems. We don't have a center in the United States. There's no anchor in the middle, that people can coalesce around. I think that's a big problem for the world. So yeah, it's a lot of uncertainty. It surprises me that they're so sanguine, because in one sense, if I were to tell the executives, you're going this way, they'd say, I don't want that. But you're going this way. Well, I don't want that. Well, what are they expecting? There's a possibility of a divided government where nothing happens. But we can only do that for so long. There are problems like, of course, in the Ukraine, but also with dealing with AI. How do we regulate it? And a divided government just isn't a framework for dealing with that.
You talked about AI, and everyone's talking about AI here in Davos as well. But what do you see as in the near term, the next 3 to 5 years, the impact of what AI could potentially do to jobs, disrupt sectors? Where do you believe we could perhaps be most vulnerable to that?
Well, a short answer is everywhere. I mean, I think AI is 10x, 100x social media in its implications. And our politicians are like deer caught in the headlights trying to figure out how to regulate it. I, by the way, don't know how you feel, but I don't think we did a very good job on social media. Yeah. If you look at mental health, the political system, everything, I think we should have regulated it much, much more than we did. And the potential for AI to be disruptive in both good ways and bad ways. I think on the jobs front, in the long run, it's probably good for everyone, but that could be a generation away. And in the interim, there's probably a lot more people are going to lose their jobs than are going to get jobs. And there's all sorts of issues about cyber warfare, all ways that it can disrupt society. And I think it's something that's quite concerning. I've actually been an optimist for a long time about it. When people say we're never inventing everything again, it's all over, which surprisingly many people have been saying here for years. I say, well, look, I'm a chess player. India's great at chess now, by the way. I'm a chess player. You look at the innovation, it's astounding, and it's coming. But now that it's here, I'm a little more nervous about some of the things that could go wrong with it.
So let me end by asking you the number one risk that you would be most worried about in 2024, and the thing that gives you the most hope and confidence.
Well, I think the number one risk has to be geopolitical. We are in a situation we have not seen in 35 years with the geopolitical instability between the Middle East, between Russia and the Ukraine, and what could happen in Taiwan, and that playing out into elsewhere in the world. Absolutely the number one risk. I think, the most optimistic scenario would be somehow we get through this election cycle and have a more rational government in the United States. Would be a big help to the world.
Well, Professor Rogoff, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in India in 2024.
Look forward to that too.
Well, we are going to take a break, but the conversations will continue. We're back in a moment with a lot more from Davos 2024. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You must be freezing.
I know,
here.
it is just like, it's torture.
You have to look glamorous. And,
That's the sad part about you.